Erev Tov, everyone. Last week, I spoke with you regarding Kitniot. Tonight, I want to speak to you about another minhag that's prevalent amongst Ashkenazim, though not universally. Kitniot is pretty universal. But this is what in Yiddish they called gebruchts. In the halachic literature, it's called matzah shruya, matzah that is soaked. Now, this arose in two different scenarios. The matzah shruya that's spoken about in the early Middle Ages dealt in reality with taking a piece of matzah and I'd say putting it into your soup. So you're soaking the piece of matzah in liquid. What was the chashash? The chashash was that the matzah may not have been baked thoroughly enough on the inside so that the possibility of chimutz still existed if it came in contact with water. You can't have chametz without water. So therefore, if you ate matzah, there's no problem. But if you dip it into water, into soup, into any sort of liquid, so then you have a problem because there may be a crumb inside the matzah that was not thoroughly baked. And now when it comes into contact with water, that crumb will start to rise. And on Pesach, chametz is b'mashu, the smallest amount is enough to render it unable to be eaten or to certainly to be part of your meal. And therefore, the custom arose not to dip the matzah in any sort of liquid. Most of the poskim held that that was not sufficient reason that the matzah was baked well. And in the words of some of the poskim, that simein kain ein ledover sof. If we go to that type of extreme, that we're worried that there's a crumb that isn't baked completely, so there's no limit, so then you can't eat the matzah itself. They discussed the fact, what about when the matzah comes into contact with your saliva before you swallow it? We should be choshesh for that too. Nevertheless, the custom arose among certain communities not to soak matzah on Pesach. But then a different matter occurred, what had greater ramifications. And that is the creation of matzah flour, matzah meal, in which people took the matzah and ground it down into a powder. And from that powder, they made food, whether it was soup balls, knedlach, there was a type of a kugel, but the powder became the base for holding the thing together. And then this naturally was made with water or with liquid. So then the problem arose again. What about the fact that the matzah may not be thoroughly baked? So how do we know that matzah is thoroughly baked? That's an issue. So if it's burned, then you pretty much are past the problem. But nobody likes to eat burned matzah. And the Torah certainly didn't want us to make matzah, God forbid, distasteful. So there arose a common consensus that if the entire process of making the matzah was completed in less than 18 minutes, then we didn't have to be choshesh for chometz in the matzah. And therefore, matzah mel was very common in the Ashkenazic world. And it became almost a Pesach food, knedlach, things like that. Then machine matzahs arose. In the 1850s, in Galicia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a baker created this machine that the matzahs were baked not by hand, each matzah individually, but they were processed through a machine. Now the machines have undergone enormous changes and enormous improvements. But it was a shaila originally regarding machine matzahs, and especially matzahs mitzvah. And there were different opinions amongst the poskim. The Shoel HaMeshiv is matir, Shlomo Kluger was not. And then the Hasidic movement arose, and the Hasidic movement adopted a number of chumras that identified itself. And one of it was that they did not eat gebrochts, that they would not eat from matzah or matzah mel that in any event came in contact with water. So the problem arose because of economic circumstances. The matzah companies, once the machine matzah was created, so there were big companies in Europe already that manufactured matzahs. We have them today. Here in Israel, we have them in the United States, in England, and other countries. So they manufactured matzah mel as well. How did they manufacture matzah mel? They took matzahs and crushed it, and crushed it into a fine powder and boxed it and sold it. The problem was that if the matzahs were very well baked, so then the matzah mel came out black, dark. And the Jewish housewife wanted white knedlach. She didn't want to have black knedlach. So therefore, in order to accommodate this, the matzah companies relied on a heter that they did not bake the matzah for matzah mel as thoroughly as they baked the matzah for matzah's mitzvah. In other words, instead of being in the oven for 18 minutes, it would only be there for 14 minutes. And it was based upon the heter which exists in all of the Rishonim, that as long as chutim nimshachim, the yeast, the dough can be taken apart yet, so that's baked sufficiently. It's not one piece of dough anymore, and therefore that's not chavetz. This was a big problem. It was a problem in Europe. The tshuvas are very, very divided on the question of white matzah mel, whether it should be used or not, even though there were great rabbonim that gave the heter and great rabbonim that even supervised these matzah companies in Europe and later in America as well. So I remember when I was affiliated with the OU, so we had the certification on one of the matzah companies in America, Horwitz Margaretten. And they always had the problem of white matzah mel. How do you get white matzah mel? So the Ribono Shel Olam is on our side, that we should have white matzah mel. Procter and Gamble produced cookies, and they created a new oven, which they called an infrared oven, that did not bake from heat alone or making a crust, but baked somehow from the inside out, so that the inside was more baked than the outside. They called it soft cookies. Didn't have a crunch to it. So I remember we sent the matzah company to Procter and Gamble to find out how this oven worked, how it could be manufactured. And within 2 or 3 years, all of the matzah companies in America shifted to using this infrared oven, so that therefore you didn't have the chash that the inside matzah wasn't baked well enough, and yet you didn't have to have a black crust on the outside that would give you black matzah balls. And so this pretty much solved the problem even today. But there are different customs. So again, especially amongst certain groups of Chassidim, they don't eat gebrochts. except that on Achron Shel Pesach, they do. Because they want to show that it's not really chometz, it's just a minig of chumrah. But if it's brought in the poskim, what if someone has a minig not to eat gebroks, but he's going to be at the Seder by his in-laws, and they do use gebroks. So there was the shaila went to different levels. Was there a question of kalim, of using the same dishes? So there, the poskim are almost unanimous that there's no shaila of kalim with gebroks. The kalim are certainly good. The question is, should the person eat gebroks? So most of the poskim said, it depends on your relationship to your in-laws. If they'll understand and not be insulted, then you don't have to eat. If, however, it will cause any sort of rift in the family, then you should certainly eat. And that remains pretty much the standard today. Though in our world today, I think people are much more inclined not to use gebroks because of the fact they want to add that everybody should be able to eat from it, etc. So you have, for instance, the jarred gefilte fish, which is kosher Pesach all year round. In other words, they only manufacture according to the fact that there's no chash chometz. So they do not use flour as a binder in the gefilte fish. Because they can't kosher for Pesach. It's too big a deal. And there are other products like that became non-gebroks, not so much out of theology, but out of the practicality of manufacture. So here in Eretz Yisrael, we have Baruch Hashem and Kibbutz Goliaths. All the minhagim are here. So there are chsherim for those that eat kitnius. There are chsherim for those that don't eat kitnius. There are chsherim for those who eat gebroks. There are chsherim for those who don't eat gebroks. And the basic rule was that one should do what one's family tradition is. There are many people who are unaware of their family tradition for various reasons. And therefore, because of that, a great percentage of the foods for Pesach, both here and in the diaspora, are completely non-gebroks. But in the individual household, where the woman makes what she wants to make, so then this becomes a question again, which is dealt with in the poskim and dealt with adequately. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashia omer ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakos Yisrael lefichach yiver lahem Torah mitzvot shenachar b'chayis man tzedko yagil Torah v'yadir.